Welcome in again, college football fans. You are here with the First and Long College Football Show, and we are going through our preseason post-spring countdown, and we're so glad that you are here. Today we're going to be talking about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. A lot of buzz being generated about the Huskers this year after, I would say, kind of a run-of-the-mill first year for any head coach, I would think. Last year with Matt Rhule, and I think the Nebraska fans are looking for a come up in the second year. Mason, you ready to talk some Huskers football? And how you doing today, bud?
Man, doing good, and always down to talk some Huskers football. This is an exciting season, I think, for Nebraska. Year two under Matt Rhule, more transfers coming in, more players going out. It's the attrition, but for the second year in a row, you're seeing Matt Rhule and company come in and reshape this whole roster. So last year, you saw him try to make something out of what he was left with from the Scott Frost era, and not a whole lot of success with that, I would say. But there were some positives. I think you can take some positives from the season before and feel like this team is taking a step in the right direction, and that's all I think that any Nebraska fan wanted to see from last year. And I think that we got that for the most part. Some poor quarterback play, I think you could kind of point your finger at and say that might have been why we had some more Nebraska type, Scott Frost type bad games and games that you probably shouldn't have lost if you're Nebraska. And now you see, obviously, you've got the 5-star Dylan Raiola coming in. You see Matt Rhule taking an initiative and tackling the most important position on the field at quarterback, knowing that it cost him a few games last year. So I think it's an exciting year for Nebraska. And by the end of this, I hope that we're painting the picture that says, hey, this is a team that can do something pretty special, I think, this year in 2024, given their schedule, given the talent that's coming in, and another year that you can build on. The team hasn't arrived yet, obviously, but I think that they will be pretty strong performers this year, and I'm excited to break it down with you, Mark, and see if you have come to the same conclusion based on your breakdown.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Rhule has been brought in here to do one thing and one thing only, and that's win in Nebraska, and that's win as soon as possible. And I think that, as you can see there on your screen, year one, this was the best first year at a school that Matt Rhule's ever had. You can see there that at Temple and Baylor, won 2 games and won respectively there. And you see the jump on your screen in year 2, 6-6 at Temple, year 2, 7-6 at Baylor the second year, and we all know what happened there at Baylor after that. It went on to do some truly special things, stuff that I'll remember honestly forever. Some games that really really stick out to me there at the end of his coaching career there at Baylor. So I think that optimism is at I won't say an all-time high, because the Nebraska Cornhuskers certainly have a rich tradition. But if you're a young college football fan and you're trying to learn about Nebraska, you may be thinking, man, I don't know. I don't really, I don't know if I got 30 minutes to spend on Nebraska, who hasn't even made a bowl game in years, right? But if you're going to pay attention to Nebraska football, I think now is the time. And I think we're about to go into some pretty exciting times. And Mason, you had talked about the quarterback position. This was in general, the offense sputtered last year. It was you can't look back on 2023 and say that it was the defense's fault for most intensive purposes. The defense played well. This offense is what needed the most attention, and it needed it quickly. And you got a lot of returning guys, but you know what? The hype train, it has left the station for Dylan Raiola, Mason, a guy that if you've been under a rock for all of recruiting season, which is really technically off season, you heard about Dylan Raiola flipping his commitment a couple of different times in his high school career. Actually came to the state of Georgia to play high school football while he was committed to the Georgia Bulldogs, and ends up in Nebraska, where he's got some, family legacy ties. So you can't blame him there. Got that bag. And Buddy he looks to be every bit worth the money that the Nebraska Cornhuskers have spent on him. I watched the spring game, and he didn't do anything to extinguish my excitement for the future of Nebraska football and the future of Dylan Raiola's football career. Um, I will add, Heinrich Haarberg is a really good number 2, Mason, and they actually let him come in and start the spring game. I thought that was a very veteran coach thing to do from Matt Rhule, but let the veteran guy come in and take those first snaps and kind of break the ice for the team. But I certainly feel as though Dylan Raiola is your guy going into the regular season. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Heinrich Haarberg maybe start the first game. I could see that and bring Dylan Raiola in from there to kind of calm, break the ice, as I said, get this season started. Maybe it's Dylan Raiola from the jump. What do you think?
I think that Raiola came to Nebraska for a reason. I think that it's a veteran. You mentioned having Haarberg start. I think it's a veteran move by Matt Rhule to keep Haarberg engaged, to keep him developing as a quarterback. I mean, he's got to know that he's not the starter, but he's got to have some sort of drive to push him through this offseason and through fall camp to say, maybe I can come in and beat this stud freshman coming in. I've got the experience. I've the players know me, that know kind of how I play, and also I think that Haarberg adds a different dynamic to this offense in his legs. He's a very talented runner. Not that Dylan Raiola isn't, but Raiola is not going to be asked to go out and run the football. Right. In certain situations and certain packages, I could see Haarberg in there throughout the season, even if he's not the starter. Just a one series a game roughly, or a third down and short sort of situation. Maybe you see Haarberg get in there. So, but I liked what I saw out of Raiola, just like you. I think that he, in a sense, he was better than advertised. And I don't want to put too much hype behind him, but this was a guy who really didn't play quarterback up until his sophomore season in high school. So yeah, there's a developmental aspect there that Raiola is lacking. That he didn't get playing football initially. I believe it was in Arizona or maybe Nevada, but somewhere out west, and eventually moved to Georgia to play at Buford, which is a powerhouse program in the state of Georgia, which has great football. And he didn't necessarily light the world on fire at Buford. I think one thing that I was really impressed with is that he protected the football. He didn't turn the ball over. He didn't make those freshman mistakes. He looked like a veteran.
One interception or something.
I think so, and I think it was later in the year. I mean, he was very efficient, overall. But this wasn't a guy who put up 4,000 yards and 50 touchdowns or anything like that either. But it was a huge step up in competition as well to Georgia, and I think it was very important. Now it's proving to be a reason for his success in his development so far. I was excited to see him play, and I think that he didn't disappoint. He had some bombs. He was pretty decisive, it seemed like, with the football, not looking like a deer in headlights. So to me, I think that Dylan Raiola is a little bit ahead of schedule from where I thought that he would be at this point in the season.
Absolutely. Let's get into some of the tools that he's going to have around him, because a quarterback is only as good as the team that is around him. I like where Nebraska sits as of right now with an offensive-minded head coach, and I think what is a pretty daggone talented quarterback room there with those 3 scholarship guys. So I feel like Nebraska's in pretty good hands. As I was looking at the roster and reading articles and watching the spring game, something kind of occurred to me that seems to be a growing sentiment around this program is wide receivers aplenty. It seems like this was a big issue, in my opinion, last year. Had a lot of young guys maybe who weren't ready to step up. Now you hit the transfer portal. You bring in a guy like Jamal Banks, who, I mean, my goodness, Mason, had a ton of yards last year for Wake Forest. I think 1,400 yards receiving Just an unbelievable season there on a bad team, and a team that does throw the ball a whole lot. They literally use the pass as an extension of the run game. They don't run the ball a whole lot at all. So definitely going to be a big difference in system, more of a pro style balance, I guess you would say, coming over to Nebraska. But I definitely think that he is a big weapon, and Isaiah Nayor coming over from Texas. Really, a lot of people that talk about Isaiah Nayor, they talk about his time at Wyoming before Texas, and that's where he really did his damage and made a name for himself. So I think a lot of people are kind of holding their breath, thinking that they may be getting the 2022 version of Isaiah Nayor, and he looked like it to me in the spring game. Mason looked very athletic, quick, good routes, and he comes from a Texas wide receiver room that certainly knew how to get it done, right? A couple of guys going very early in the NFL draft this past season, and Texas is well known. I would probably say right up there with Ohio State as far as receiving cores in the country. So seeing a guy leave that room to go to a place like Nebraska, I don't really take a slanted look at that. I think that is very understandable and a great pickup for Nebraska. There's tons of guys that aren't on this page here. Malachi Coleman, you'll see in the bottom left of that slide there. That's a young guy that I believe is going to be able to have a chance to really step up this season. He got a little bit of work last year, but I'm thinking that he's going to be able to kind of come into his own. There's tons of guys not named on this on this here. I think the wide receiver room is in pretty good hands this season for the Nebraska Huskers. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Jamal Banks had a pretty good careers overall at Wake Forest with his 2 seasons there. Was a all ACC freshman of the year, I believe. His first year in 22 with a little over 600 yards there. Great player. Isaiah Nayor was a great player at Wyoming before he transferred to Texas.
Right.
It ended up with 13 touchdowns in a season at Wyoming, and that's what got him the offer to go transfer to Texas. And then unfortunately battled the injury bug at Texas, and we haven't seen him play in in a bigger program. I mean, Wyoming's pretty fun program for the diehard college football fans, but not as big as, of course, Texas. And now Nebraska, another big name. I'm excited to see him on the big stage, hopefully healthy. I think of all the players in this room, Nayor could have the most potential if he stays healthy, right? And I think that's the big question. Speaking of potential, I think when you look at a guy like Jalen Lloyd, look, 39.5 yards per catch last year, only 6 catches, but 3 touchdowns on 6 catches. This guy can absolutely take the top off the defense coming out of the slot. He's exactly what you want. And I'm really excited to see what he's able to do along with Malachi Coleman. So, those are 4 bona fide receivers right there. You got I believe a top 150 overall player in Ja'Cory Barney coming in as a true freshman. Another guy who could potentially find himself a role in this offense, if players go down. But ultimately, I'm excited to see, like you said, this wide receiver room perform. This is going to be a strength for this team, I believe, and couple it with some good quarterback play, hopefully, if you're a Nebraska fan, and it could be an exciting aerial attack this season for this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at these running backs, and Nebraska did a good job going into the portal and going and picking up Dante Dowdle. I think that is going to end up being a big pickup. Not a lot of playing time last year for Oregon. Playing behind Bucky Irving, and seemingly the season being on the line so many times for Oregon last year. It was put your ones out there a lot for the Oregon Ducks. So Dowdle didn't get a ton of carries, but as you can see, 5.3 yards per carry. Gabe Irvin Jr., I think, is going to get a big piece of the load this year, and Emmett Johnson, 411 yards last year. I think this is a serviceable. I think this is a serviceable running back room. You got Ramir Johnson, that is not listed here on this page, but him and Emmett Johnson both had season-ending injuries last year and knocked them out of the season pretty early. You never know. When guys are coming back from something like that, a season-ending injury, you never know. You got to hope that they're going to come back into the same form they were last year before they got hurt. But all in all, I think with you bringing Dowdle in, I feel okay with this running back room. How do they pass protect? That's going to be interesting to me. This offensive line, we're going to get to it in just a second here. I think it's improved. I still think that it's a little bit unproven, right? Going to need these running backs to step up and pass pro. It looks to me, I would think that Nebraska is going to want to utilize these wide receivers in this offense this year. And if they're going to do that, they're going to need pass protection. Lots of sacks given up last year. Going to need help from these running backs. What do you think about the running back room?
Yeah, I mean, this is a unit that was battling injury all year last year. They were just absolutely depleted. Ramir Johnson goes down, Emmett Johnson goes down, Gabe Irvin goes down. You're left with receivers out there playing running back, and really you're just trying to make it work. That's why you saw Harburg with a lot of those.
I think he was
a
the
lot of
leading
those
rusher last year, wasn't
he
he?
was, yeah, by a pretty large margin.
And that's never a good sign. That's never a good sign. I don't care how good the quarterback is. You don't want to be in your leading rusher.
Well, and it's not like he was, freaking Robert Griffin III out there running the football. He was kind of out there, out of necessity running the football. So ultimately, I mean, if this group stays healthy, I think that they have the pieces. Gabe Irvin's a guy who's been hurt the past 3 years. We've never seen him get up and go. So could there be some potential there? Yeah, absolutely. There's also that large potential for him getting injured again. And I think that that's what Matt Rhule and company did this offseason to kind of mitigate that risk of Irvin getting hurt, is to bolster that running back room. But ultimately, a running back group is only as good as its offensive line. Let's get into talking about the offensive line, and I'm excited to see what you think of this group and this unit, and what they're going to do this year.
Yeah, let's talk about the meat and taters of this, or how about the meat and corn of this Cornhusker offense? I'm here all week. I do these on the go, just off the top of my head. I mean, come on.
It's rare that we have it's rare that we get to talk about a team whose mascot is one of our food groups, like, something that we get to digest, on a regular basis.
Yeah, we don't have any. I grew up an SEC guy. We don't have any food-based mascots in the SEC, do we? Other than Gator, I like to eat some Gator.
If you're a dog fan, Gator's about as close as it gets. Gamecocks.
We all eat Gamecocks. Oh man! All right, let's talk about this offensive line. As you can see there, your offensive line coach is Mr. Raiola, the Connect, man. They're paying this guy a buttload of money. He's worth every penny. Okay, the guy right there on the left side of your screen is a big part of why Dylan Raiola ended up in Nebraska, in my opinion, and not the only reason. I'm not saying he doesn't want to be there. He is bought in, and I am 100% excited for him. But there's his uncle on the screen, and is your offensive line coach, former NFL offensive lineman himself. I like this group in the fact that there's a ton of guys returning, and I think there is an obvious answer to the depth question that's been answered in the offseason this year. You've got a whole nother group of guys, left tackle all the way to right tackle, pretty much, that are ready to step in and play this season. And I think you're going to be able to see Nebraska rotate guys, keep guys a lot more healthy, and I think you're going to see some of those second and third and fourth and some cases even fifth-year strides for some of these guys when you're talking about somebody like Bryce Benhart, who's literally about to exercise his COVID year to come back and help this Nebraska Cornhuskers team. That's a common trend on this team, Mason. There's tons of guys who have been here forever, and that's got to make you feel good if you're a fan of a team like the Nebraska Cornhuskers. There's obviously a lot of camaraderie on this roster, and especially in this offensive line group. I think it will be a much needed answer to a lot of Cornhusker prayers, Mason, because last year it was pretty putrid, and it caused a lot of issues, a lot of injuries. I think were due to the fact of lack of protection, right? You get guys hurt whenever they're getting popped over and over and over and over and over. Like this group, I think that this is. I don't think this is the best offensive line in the country or anything. I don't think this is the best overall offense in the country or anything, but I think it could be like top 30. I think it could be a top 30 offense. And if this is a top 30 offense matched with a top 20 defense that I think it should be a top 20 defense. We'll get to the defense here in just a minute. This should be a top 25 team, should it not?
Yeah, absolutely. The offense is not the strength of this team, and the offensive line is not the strength of this offense. So if those two things can be true, but you're also getting top 30 play out of the offensive line, yeah, this is going to be a pretty good unit. That given their and given their schedule, I think that would make them a very dangerous group as a total team. But when I look at this offensive line, it's all about the returning talent. All four of these guys, four of the five, so outside of Maskua, they all played on this team last year and know each other and have chemistry together. And there's no unit that matters more at than offensive line. So I think that having the talent, which is probably pretty mediocre as a whole, the total ceiling of this offensive line is probably pretty low, technically, but I think that the veteran leadership of this unit and the overall experience this unit brings will more than make up for that, because that's what it's all about. So if they can lean on each other and trust each other, and also the early part of their schedule is pretty easy. So I think that if they can build that experience together, playing together, and that confidence with each other, I think this could be a dangerous unit towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I think consistency is the word that the consistency needs to be the key word for this offensive line group as the season goes on. You don't have to be great. You don't have to be outstanding. You've got to be serviceable. You've got to be dependable, and you've got to be consistent. There was no consistency last year. Guys shuffled all over this line, multiple guys playing multiple different positions, a lot of thinking going on instead of reacting. I'd like to think that's going to change this year, as continuity it has got to be unavoidable in a second year with a guy like Matt Rhule and this coaching staff. Let's jump over to the defense, Mason. This was the strength of this team last year, kept them in the games that they were close in. And we'll just kind of go through the numbers here and this kind of explain my thought process on this. Tony White did an outstanding job with this defense. He came in and took the lemons that he was given and made lemonade out of it. And that's all that you can do as a coach is take what you got, especially in a first year in a program like this. Number 13 scoring defense, number 11 total defense, number 8 rushing yards per game allowed. And you got 8 total starters returning in 2024. That's all really, really, really good news for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Tony White has done, I think, a really, really good job with this team, and I suspect that will continue. And with 8 out of 11 starters coming back this year, I've got high hopes for this defense. And it all starts with this Nebraska defensive line. Nash Hutmacher is back, Ty Robinson, Cameron Linhart, among others, right? This isn't everybody here, but gives you a look at some of the guys that are coming back. You know, this is some experience coming back, and guys that I thought some of which look really good in the spring game as well. They're not just names that have been there forever. They're names that are popping up in the broadcast whenever you're watching the spring game. And I thought this defensive line did a really good job in the spring game pushing the pocket around. And that's kind of what impressed me about this offensive line that we just talked about in the spring game was their ability to give the quarterbacks time. That was not something that was this team wasn't able to do that last year. And I really thought that this defensive line, last year would just actually absolutely mash the offensive line. I thought it was more of an even bout in the spring game, and I think that you got to be really happy about that as a Husker fan. But I've got high hopes for this defense this year, Mason. What do you think about the D-line and the work that Tony White has done with Nebraska?
Yeah, I think Hutmacher there is probably the most intriguing of the bunch. Playing a nose tackle position and you're able to amass 4.5 sacks. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty. That shows some real twitch. And playing in a tough position there, if you're able to put pressure onto the quarterback, that's really speaking volumes for you as a player and your team around you. Somebody's taking the bulk of the offensive line attention there, and somebody's allowing him to get free. And I don't think that'll be the case too much this year. I think that they may have his number circled there a little bit more. But then also Lenhart, there as a true freshman last year, 3 sacks, 16 total tackles there, 9 solo. Look, he was a true freshman. He had limited playing time and was still able to get 3 sacks. I think he'll be a guy who's well over 5 this year, pushing 10 sacks. As his role increases this season. He's still listed as the second defensive end on the depth chart behind Jamari Butler. But I think that as a talent, this might be your most talented guy on the defensive line. And I don't think that it's very close, honestly. I think that this guy has the biggest ceiling of the bunch.
Let's look at the back end of this defense, or at least the middle part of it. Look, there's lots of answers at the linebacker. The linebacker portion of this team. That room is, I feel like, very, very talented, and I'm including middle linebackers and edge rushers here whenever I'm talking about these linebackers, because really what Nebraska is going to be doing is they're going to have 3 down linemen, and that fourth guy is going to be a linebacker disguised as a defensive lineman. And look, there's going to be lots of fronts thrown, but here's the big question for this Nebraska defense this year. If it wants to improve on what happened last year, a lot of these guys are back. We've already said that. Tons of the same dudes that we've seen. Can you get turnovers to help this team? And are there edge rushers that can beat Big Ten tackles and actually rush the passer effectively? And I'm not talking about blitzing and rushing the passer. I'm talking about, can you bring 4 and get home? If those 2 things can be answered by this defense, it is going to catapult this team into the top 25, as I said earlier whenever we were talking about what this team could potentially be. The offense obviously had trouble turning, they turned the ball over last year, Mason. It was bad. Right? Every time we turned around, we saw a fumble from a Nebraska running back or the quarterback there. I can't even remember his name now, in one ear and out the other, the guy from Georgia Tech.
Jeff Sims.
Quarterback. It was bad. Jeff Sims, it was bad. Very hard to watch. If this defense can counteract that by getting some turnovers of their own this year and then getting home to the quarterback, this is going to be an elite defense in the Big Ten this season. What do you think about the linebacker group? We'll talk about the secondary. As I said, several guys back there in that secondary. We'll get to that in a second. But I feel really, really, really good about this linebacker group. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of potential here. Ultimately, I'm curious, and I think a lot of Nebraska fans probably share this sentiment with me. You lose Heinrich and you lose Reimer from this linebacker group. Who's replacing them? You look at the numbers here on your screen. there's not a ton of tackles, not a ton of statistics, which at linebacker tells me there's not a ton of playing time, right? And that's you're looking at their backups and Bullock and Wright from last year, who are going to be asked to come in and be the middle linebackers for this group. Stephon Thompson here recently has been moved from outside linebacker to middle linebacker. So I don't know what exactly went on during spring practice, but it looks like he's shaping up to be sort of the backup middle linebacker to Javin. I don't know how to say his name. Javin, right? So
Yeah, sure.
he's a transfer who came in and we're thinking is going to play outside linebacker. And I don't know if this is a move because he didn't perform very well in spring practice, or if MJ Sherman just stepped up and played like the 5-star that he was this offseason and just took his spot. But ultimately, it does look like now he's going to be listed as an inside linebacker. We may see him play both. This may be sort of a utility piece in the linebacker group. And also, he may add a different look. You may go with 5 defensive linemen at some points in goal line stances and maybe have 2 coming off the edge on each side. I don't know. I'm not an X's and O's guy, to be honest with you, but it is interesting that Stephon Thompson, does move from outside linebacker to inside. And he'll kind of add that third linebacker and that depth piece to shore up the middle there. But ultimately on the edge, I mean, you've got MJ Sherman and Princewell Umanamilan. So look, another talented freshman last year in Princewell. He came in and had a sack, didn't play very much, but ultimately he showed his potential to come in and have virtually no drop off there on the edge. So excited to see what he does.
It's in the genes, isn't it, though, Mason?
That's right. And if you don't know, he's got 2 older brothers playing college football. One of them might be a first-round draft pick at the end of next year. So there's Prince, and then Prince Lee is the middle brother, and then you've got Princewell here for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Prince Lee.
Princes.
Yeah, Prince Lee was playing for Florida and just transferred to Ole Miss, and he's an absolute stud. Go out and get it type of defensive lineman. I'm excited to see what he does this year, but ultimately for Nebraska, I think that you're hoping some of those genes wore off onto Princewell, and I think that they did. I think that he showed a very high ceiling, like I said, and I'm hoping that he just takes the next step forward and can be he's going to get the snaps this year without a doubt. I mean, he's the second outside linebacker for this group. They're going to rotate a lot. What is he going to do with those snaps? I think that's the big question.
Yeah. Well, and just to clear it up, because I know how hardcore you Huskers fans are. You a bunch of cornheads. John Bullock, it says 27 tackles there. If you look at his stat, that's solo tackles. So he had over 50 tackles last year. Javin Wright over 50 tackles. Stephon Thompson over 50 tackles. And all of those guys played in every single game last year. So I feel really good about it. And that's not it. There's guys behind them. Chief Borders, Makai Gabayer, however the hell you say his name. You talked about Princewell. I think there's solid guys there, and I think there's solid depth behind them. I think the defensive line is good enough to keep them big paws off of these guys for the most part. I like it. I feel good about it. Let's go to the secondary. Malcolm Hartzog, Isaac Gifford is really the name that sticks out to you. He had over 80 tackles last year out of the secondary. Tommy Hill coming back. I think this is one of the better secondary groups, other than, you can go ahead and I think put Ohio State number 1, right, in the Big Ten. And maybe you got a couple more there, but I think this maybe is top 5 secondary in the Big Ten, possibly, at least starting guys. I won't go as far as like a 2 deep or anything. But man, these are some really talented fellas here. And I think this is going to continue to be a strength for this team. yeah, you can see all the stats on the page there. As I said, those are all, like solo tackles. It is a little concerning to see a guy in the secondary make 80-something tackles in a season.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a little not concerning. It's great. It's good, but it's just for that many tackles to have been made that far back in the defense. I think that's kind of interesting. I think that'll change a bit this year. Good to even see Isaac Gifford have not as good of numbers this year, and it possibly indicate an even better year for the defense overall. What do you think about secondary? I think it's solid. They're going to be tested though, Mason. There is some really good wide receiver cores in the Big Ten. We're going to get to the schedule here in just a minute. We're going to look through the 2024 schedule game by game and kind of gauge that up and see what kind of teams they'll be playing. But all in all, front line of this secondary, the first team anyway, really like it.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, the three guys on your screen there have played pretty well. Overall, I think that you're adding, and that's kind of been the theme as we're kind of wrapping up the depth chart here for this team is there's a lot of returning talent. I had the same impression as you when I saw Gifford's stats last year. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy had 86 tackles. That's probably not a good thing because a lot of those were runs that got to the third level of the defense. So
yeah, right.
Probably not a good thing, but also it shows his downhill pursuit as a linebacker and his ability to read the defense and act. That those he saved a lot of plays and a lot of yards last season with some of those tackles, and also 8 pass deflections. Come on, that's really good for a safety right there. And then on the edge, you've got at left cornerback Tommy Hill with 9 pass deflections, 4 interceptions. Heck of a year for him overall. And then Hartzog was a little bit more in the middle there. But 27 solo tackles is pretty impressive. A little bit, he plays the run a little bit better there, I think, and still 6 pass deflections, not too shabby either. They bring in Deshaun Singleton as a transfer, and he's a guy who's playing there alongside Isaac Gifford at free safety, and has really played pretty well. He's been pretty serviceable for the most part. Kobe Brett's at Rover. Another serviceable player, and then you add a utility piece in transfer Bly Hill coming over from St. Francis. I think he's a guy who is very unproven coming from a smaller school like that, but could be the utility piece where when any of these guys go down, he can kind of just slide in and play. Overall, like you said, there's really behind those names, there's not much going on in this team. So I'm concerned if there are injuries in this secondary. I'm concerned that that could really affect this defense as a whole, which is an otherwise excellent unit, excellent side of the football. Definitely the stronger side, I think, right now going into the season. But let's see kind of how this group holds up. Ultimately, I think, like you said, they've got a tough road to haul in the Big Ten this year with a lot of impressive wide receivers to match up against.
Yeah, I think so for sure. All right, let's take a look at the schedule, man. UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, and then at Purdue. And then you got Rutgers. That's pretty easy start there. Your first 6 games, man. I think
it's
there's
really
plenty
7
of time
with Indiana. I mean,
yeah, you can throw Indiana on there too. Those front 7 games there, and you'll have a bye week before that Indiana game. Um, think about the hype that's going to be behind this team. They go 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, 5-0, 6-0, 7-0, and then it's time to go to Columbus on 10/26 there as an undefeated 7-0 Nebraska team, which is just unseen and unheard of by any college football fan that's younger than like 20, right? So, I mean, I think we're in for a lot of hype to start the season. Mason, I think this Nebraska team is going to beat the ever-living stew out of Colorado. I think they're just going to absolutely bludgeon Colorado that second week of the season. Maybe I'm wrong. I know this was, I mean, Colorado won this game last year. Um, but man, I have put in the time. I have looked at every player on each of these teams, and I've got a feeling Nebraska's about to roll up a daggum cornstalk on these boys and whoop them. Um, what do you think about that first, that first little group there, and then take us into the second half of the season where things do get a lot harder?
Yeah, I mean, look, this team is probably going to be as good as its offensive line holds up for the most part, and as good as Dylan Raiola protects the football. I think that's the two biggest questions that I have this year. You've got pretty much a whole the entire coaching staff coming back this year. They do add a couple of guys for the most part. New tight ends coach, new offensive coordinator, and Glenn Thomas, who comes over from the Steelers, but has worked with Matt Rhule in the past. So ultimately, that consistency has got to matter, right, in year two. That consistency is what gives coaches and teams a year two bump. We haven't seen that with Colorado, right? They had more attrition this year, it seems like, than they had last year. So they're going to miss that year two bump, I think, because of that. And I'm just kind of comparing those two schools right now, because you were just talking about them. But
Right.
I'm with you. I think that is going to matter this year with Nebraska and Colorado when those two teams match up. I don't think you'll see that's not going to be Dylan Raiola's breakout game, right? It's going to be a tough
Yeah.
matchup for him with that secondary. It's going to be a tough matchup for that offensive line I think, with a pretty good Colorado defensive line this year, potentially with all the
Yeah.
transfers that they bring in. But if that O line can hold up against Colorado, then I'm with you. I think that Nebraska wins that football game. It'll be a huge win for Nebraska, but I don't think that's going to be Dylan Raiola's coming out party necessarily. We're going to get a hint of him. He may struggle a little bit. It's only week 2, but ultimately, I think that they can pull that win out. But going back, let's look at UTEP first, because I don't know if you realize this or not, Mark, but Nebraska has not won won their first game in the past 4 years. So it's been a
Wow.
tricky one. It's been a tricky one for Nebraska. UTEP should be the victim. I don't think that they'll go 0 for 5 in the past 5 years, but ultimately they got to get past that first one, right? I think that's a big hurdle for Nebraska for this program. And then, like you said, they could beat Colorado. That game could go either way, but they could beat Colorado. Northern Iowa should be a win. Illinois should be a win this year. I don't think that they're as good as they have been the past 2 seasons, with some attrition in the program for Illinois. Then you got Purdue, who is another team that I think is on the up and up. I'm curious to see kind of how they end up. I don't know if they're quite as far into their rebuild as Nebraska is, but interested to see that. Keep following along on this show, because we do have a Purdue breakdown coming up just in a couple of days here, if you're watching this as we post it. So Purdue is kind of a 50-50 game to me. I might lean a little bit towards Nebraska, but it is at Purdue, so we'll have to see. Rutgers can be tricky. Rutgers, they've
Mm-hmm.
kind of come around here the past couple of years, but you do get this game in Omaha, so I think that really matters. And then you got Indiana, who I think is going to be an absolute win. So look, a lot of Nebraska sites and fans are saying, "Hey, we got a chance to go 7-0," and sure, there is a chance, but I don't think that it's like a greater than 50% chance that you win all 7 of those games. I think it's more likely that you're probably 5-2 at the end of that stretch, and 6-1 would be really nice ultimately. Then you got Ohio State, which is probably going to be an L. What you're asking for is for your team to go out and play for 60 full minutes and be competitive in that game. And if we see Raiola grow in that game, then I think that you're going to be really excited for the rest of the season, where you invite UCLA in. That's going to be rebuilding. I think that's a definite win. You do have to go to USC, which could be a little bit of a challenge, but ultimately, when I look at these rosters, I think that Nebraska is a more complete team overall. I think that could be a win for Nebraska, but it is tough to play on the West Coast. So we'll just have to kind of see how that plays out. I give it a 50-50 chance. And then Wisconsin is going to be really tough. Iowa is going to be tough, but I think I would give Nebraska the edge there. Look, ultimately, I think that this is a team that's going bowling this year. I think when I look at this, the way that this Nebraska team is built, it's built for sustainment. It's built to sustain success for the next 3 years, right? This year and 2 years after this. I think you've got a really strong piece at quarterback. And I think that you're building a deep roster at Nebraska. Couple their roster today with a top 25 overall recruiting class, and you're starting to build that pipeline, and you're starting to get that sustained success. So ultimately, for Nebraska, I don't think that this is the year you circle and say, oh, we need to go out and win this year. You need to have a winning record for sure, which is a step in the right direction. But to me, Nebraska in 2025 is going to be a dangerous team. In 2024, they'll be a good team. So when I break this schedule down after looking at everything, I'm thinking that like 9-3 is probably the ceiling for this team, which would be great considering where they're at and what they've got. Look, and we didn't even mention, they didn't have a single NFL player drafted last year, right? So that kind of says a lot about where the program was and what Matt Rhule inherited. But this year, when you look at the roster, there's also not a bona fide first round talent on this roster, right? But ultimately, as a whole, I think that they play really well together. And I think as a football team, this is a pretty sound football team. So 9-3 being the ceiling. Look, if they get to that point, I think it's going to be there's going to be a party in Omaha, Nebraska, because that's a heck of a season. But ultimately, I would say the floor is probably 7-5, and they'll probably end up middle in there at 8-4. But this is a good team. I think that they're heading in the right direction, and this is a team that I'll definitely be watching this year.
Yeah, I see. In my opinion, and we're this is prediction season, so we're going to throw our predictions out there so that we can look back on this stuff and you guys can make fun of us and all that stuff whenever it goes completely wrong or completely sideways, right? But I think Wisconsin's a loss. I think Iowa's a loss. I think Ohio State's a loss, and then I think you've got a loss in there that you're not expecting somewhere. Whether it be Colorado. I don't think it's Colorado, though, Mason. I just don't see Colorado, not early in the season. I mean, Nebraska is going to be so damn ready for that game. I feel really good about that one as we've already broke down both of those teams. I really like Nebraska's roster over Colorado right now. I could see maybe going on the road to Purdue and losing that game. Purdue's going to be a feisty team, not they're going to be fighting to be bowl eligible. So not like an amazing team or anything, but I definitely think it'll be a formidable opponent, especially on the road. That'll be the first road game of the season, probably the first road start ever for Dylan Raiola. So going to be a packed house there early in the season in West Lafayette, Indiana. Hey, and Nebraska fans, look, you found your home for college football, okay? And we live in the YouTube world, okay? Everybody's got 3 or 4 different things that they subscribe to or whatever. Make us one of your 3 or 4. Come hang out with us. We're talking Power 4 college football teams all year round. Hey, we're SEC Georgia Bulldog fans, okay? But we're going to be watching every Big Ten game. We're going to be watching every ACC game. We're going to be watching every single Big 12 game. We're going to be here from September all the way to January, baby. It's going to be a really, really fun year. This is number 33 on our stop to all the way to number 1. We're going to take us all the way to number 1 right into the season, breaking down every team. So what we're doing is familiarizing ourselves with every single team before the year starts. Come join us and do it with us. We'd love to have you. Drop us a comment. Let us know what your beloved Cornhuskers record will be this season. 7.5 is the win total. What do you think, over or under? Let us know in the comment section. We appreciate you guys watching, and stay tuned to the First and Long College Football Show for more one-off videos, and we'll be going live every single week throughout the season. We hope to see you there. Thank you.